Today we'll be diving into the exciting realm of medical research once again, particularly two studies that explored the potential benefits of the drug that I'm sure many of you know called Dutasteride for treating hair loss, specifically androgenetic alopecia. And I'm going to be focusing on a particular study that one of my viewers posted in the comments, and this mostly concerns Dutasteride in relation to the hairline and how different 5-alpha reductase enzymes are distributed throughout the scalp. So let's delve into it and just have this discussion. So the first study right away is a systematic review and meta-analysis published in the Clinical Interventions in Aging in 2019. I referenced this in my last video on combining Finasteride and Dutasteride, but the aim of this study was to evaluate the efficacy and safety of Dutasteride and Finasteride in treating men with androgenetic alopecia over a 24-week treatment period. So the results showed that Dutasteride outperformed Finasteride in several areas. These included the mean change in total hair count, the investigators' assessment of global photographs for both vertex and frontal views, panel global photographic assessment for vertex and frontal views, and also the subject's own self-assessments. And when it comes to safety, Dutasteride did not show a significant difference compared with Finasteride regarding altered libido, erectile dysfunction, and ejaculation disorders. This suggests that Dutasteride might be a more effective option for treating androgenetic alopecia. And remember, if you have more aggressive androgenetic alopecia, you might want to think about just starting with Finasteride first, but maybe also looking at Dutasteride eventually, because the severity of your androgenetic alopecia may affect the efficacy of Finasteride. And we've seen people who have severe androgenetic alopecia, so what does that even mean, right? This means people who are balding very fast. Maybe they're going through Norwoods in about a year or two. They went from Norwood 1 to Norwood 3. That's very rapid. Or maybe they started losing hair when they were 16 or 17 or 18, right? These are severe androgenetic alopecia cases. So it would probably make sense to use a stronger 5-AR like Dutasteride, maybe at 0.5 milligrams, maybe even 2 milligrams. But definitely starting Finasteride is that first line of defense to see how you may react to it, because surely enough, everyone's different, right? And it's not always the case that people with severe androgenetic alopecia won't respond well to Finasteride. Most do, but there is that sliver of the population that do not get that long-term efficacy. So now the second study that I'm really excited to be looking at, it was posted by some of my subscribers. I'll put their little thing over here, a screenshot of their comment here. But I want to examine this study pretty quick. The second study we're going to be discussing comes from the Journal of Investigative Dermatology, and this study was published as far back as 1997. So it's 2023 right now, so that's about 26 years ago. I'm not sure how obscure this study is, if it even is obscure, but this is the first time that I'm seeing it. But this study aimed to measure different levels of 5-alpha reductase type 1 and type 2 enzymes in the hair follicles of men and women with androgenetic alopecia. Interestingly, the study found that both men and women have higher levels of 5-alpha reductase type 1 and type 2 in the frontal hair follicles than the occipital follicles. And that refers to the hairs on the side of the head. And this is interesting because when it comes to hair transplants, we typically look at that behind the ear area, that shoe horse looking kind of area. This area is referred to as the Hippocratic wreath, and it's something that you've probably seen in many men, old man haircut or hairline that people like to say. I'm showing images of it right now on the screen. This is where the occipital region actually is. So having those two things kind of correlate with each other, where there's more androgenetic alopecia in the frontal areas in the mid-scalp, and then gradually when you're going back, there's less androgenic activity or damage to those sort of follicles. I think that kind of correlates well with what this study is talking about. So what this may suggest is that the closer you are to the hairline, the more effective Dutasteride is. Because if the type 1 and type 2 5-alpha reductase enzymes are more prevalent towards the hairline. So the closer, as you go closer to the hairline, the more prevalent these enzymes are. If you have dutasteride, you wouldn't have to worry about it because it takes out all three, because there's actually three types of 5-alpha reductase enzyme. So it's not just 1 and 2, it's 1, 2, and 3. And if it's taking out type 1, right, because we know finasteride only mostly blocks type 2. If it's taking out type 1, that means you may have some protection to the hairline and other areas of the scalp that are more susceptible to type 1 5-alpha reductase degradation. So some notes worth mentioning from the study is that the levels of androgen receptors was found to be 30% greater in frontal hair follicles than the occipital follicles in both men and women. The total receptor content in females was about 40% less than the amount in males, indicating that women have fewer receptors in their hair follicles than men with androgenetic alopecia. And that just makes sense. Women typically have lower levels of androgens than men do, and this includes testosterone, which is the primary hormone that interacts with the androgen receptor. It makes sense, therefore, that women would have fewer androgen receptors in their hair follicles, as these receptors are designed to interact with androgens. The fewer receptors in women likely contributes to the observed differences in hair growth and loss patterns between men and women. Androgenetic alopecia, commonly referred to as male or even female pattern baldness, is derived by the interaction of androgens with these receptors. And men tend to lose hair in a well-defined pattern, such as receding hairlines or bald spots on the crown, whereas women with androgenetic alopecia generally experience diffuse thinning over the entire scalp rather than distinct bald spots. And moreover, the distribution of androgen receptors in different parts of the scalp may also contribute to the specific patterns of hair loss seen in androgenetic alopecia. For example, the frontal hair follicles, which are typically affected in androgenetic alopecia, have more androgen receptors than the occipital follicles at the back of the head, which are typically unaffected, as stated in the study. So in that particular sense, the number of androgen receptors and their distribution across different regions of the scalp may play a significant role in determining an individual's susceptibility to pattern of hair loss. And we know there are so many ways for people to express androgenetic alopecia, whether it's through the traditional Norwood scales or whether it's retrograde alopecia, or maybe it's a bit more diffuse. But yeah, it does make sense that women would have less androgen receptors in their scalp than men, especially men with androgenetic alopecia. The researchers also found that the enzyme arom, referring to aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogens, was found to be much higher in hair follicles of women than men. And again, that makes sense because women have more estrogen than men. But this suggests that the aromatase may be an important enzyme in limiting the level of androgens in hair follicles of women by converting androgens to estrogens. And I've heard people using topical estrogen on their scalp to try to, combat androgens, especially guys, which I don't think that's a good idea, by the way. Maybe if you're a woman or someone who's trying to transition in a particular way, by all means, go ahead and add that to your stack. The researchers were able to determine all of this information by using immunohistochemical analysis. And this is a method to visualize specific proteins in cells to show the expression of androgen receptors and 5-AR enzymes in the outer root sheath and dermal papilla of the hair follicles. The 1997 study that examined the prevalence of type 1 and type 2 5-alpha reductase enzymes had a relatively low subject count, with only 12 men and 12 women. This makes it more difficult to generalize the findings, and furthermore, the study revealed significant differences between men and women's hair follicles, suggesting that the individual factors such as sex and possibly other genetic and even ethnic backgrounds, we don't even know of their ethnic backgrounds, could impact the effectiveness of dutasteride, or really it just leaves a lot of variables on the table for us to make any surefire claims that dutasteride is very effective for the hairline because it blocks more of the 5-alpha reductase type 1 enzyme, which is more prevalent in the hairline. Maybe that is the case, and it still is an effective 5-AR inhibitor. It blocks all of the 5-alpha reductase enzymes and even more of that type 2 5-alpha reductase enzyme, which is probably why it's more effective. But to say that it's more effective for the hairline because of this one study that doesn't even have that much of a high subject count, it's a very, very low subject count, seems a bit of a wonky claim to make. But looking at the methodology and how they went about analyzing the density of the 5-alpha reductase enzymes and where they mostly were prevalent, it does seem like if this study were to be expanded to a larger population, a much more varied population, you could find more surefire claims, and we can possibly make the statement that dutasteride is more effective than finasteride at saving people's hairlines. But again, there's too many variables to this. But in conclusion, while dutasteride appears to be promising in treating hair loss, not just appears to be promising, it is promising in treating hair loss. When it comes to the hairline, more research is needed to fully understand its effectiveness, whether it is effective at bringing back people's hairlines because it reduces more of that type 1 5-alpha reductase enzyme, or because it's reducing more of the type 2 5-alpha reductase enzyme than finasteride can. So if you're considering using dutasteride, consult a healthcare professional, and not me. I'm just some guy who just recently graduated college or university for some people who might live in other countries other than the United States. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Peace.